97.7 Dundalk FM. Town Talk.
Yes, that's the D11 Runners, a fabulous band from the late 80s, early 90s, and love letters. And I'm joined by founder member of D11 Runners, and that's George Fitzgerald. You're very welcome, George.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Fabulous listening to that tune now, and great. We're going to talk about the D11 Runners in a moment or two, but your life is an amazing life, and I know a little bit about it. I'm going to hear more. You were, well, obviously from Finglas Ballymun area, a boxer. You're a broadcaster, and of course you're an author, and you have a new book, and we're going to talk about that. But first of all, let's go back to the start. Tell us about, I suppose, your origins in Finglas and Ballymun and how that came about.
Well, we were in a house years ago, and back in the 1960s. We lived in a house, and it was a big house. We were only children, and the ceiling was falling. There was problems. So at that particular time, then we were housed out of it, and we were sent to Ballymun, and we lived on the 10th floor named Ken Tower. We lived there from 1966, I think it was, still around, till November 1973, and then we were moved into the sprawling housing estate of South Finglas. So
you were one of the original towers in Ballymun?
Yeah, we would have been probably, we were the first family into that flat, or basically the second. We would have been brand new, yeah. And
what was that like growing up?
Yeah, it was. Well, you're a child. You didn't really know any different. It was just basically. But there was a little bit of a distinction even as children, because I remember as a kid in school, like when we were in the Holy Spirit in Ballymun, there would be a little bit of distinction where kids would be saying they're from the flats, right? So there was that from the initial stages, and then obviously when the lifts weren't walking, you 10 flights to climb. But as kids, that didn't matter. It was just all games and play, really, that type of way. Yeah. And that was the environment. And then we moved, obviously, into South Finglas.
George, you mentioned school, and it wasn't necessarily your favourite place. And I read a wee story about you and a dunce's hat, and then you visited a church. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, what happened there was, when I was a child, I suppose when I was a child as a kid, I wrote this in a book called Somebody Up There Likes Me Too. I was given a licorice sweet, which I didn't like, and I went up and I spit it into the bucket, in the Holy Spirit, and for that I was dragged into a corner, and the dunce's hat was put on my head. Years later, now when I was in Finglas then, I was in what would have been called the bad row. The class was divided up with very good boys, middle to row boys, and then the bad boys, and all depending on your academic level. We would have been put into the bad row and that. So schooling there wasn't exactly a fascinating experience. However, in saying that, when I was a younger man, I went into a church in Pearse Street, St. Mark's Church. I knew people in there, and I walked up and I went into a room, and there was women there. And I didn't want to leave out of embarrassment of the fact that I walked in, because it would have looked very suspicious. So I sat there for a few moments. The meeting was coming to an end, and this very heavy-set woman came over to me, and she asked me who I was, and I introduced myself. And anyway, in the course of the conversation, she said to me, I want you to go home, and when you go home, I want you to make a hat, a pointy hat. And I said to her, like a dunce's hat? She says, yeah. And I says, right. Now, I was very startled by why she said that. And then she says to me, I want you to take it off, because this is now over. The Lord has taken this off your head. And it was like, in a sense, I suppose, a mystical, not using the word right, it was a very strange experience. And for me, from my personal experience and background, quite shocking really, because of the fact that she pinpointed something that she couldn't have known about. And I didn't say anything to her. I just said, yeah, okay, that's grand. And I got out of there as fast as I could, because I was a young man, and I go, what happened there? But I did do it. I went home and did make the hat and took her off, and there seemed to be a breakthrough from that moment on.
You never look back, indeed, George. George, you were a very good boxer. Tell us a little bit about your boxing.
Yeah, when we started off boxing as kids, like we were only, when I say myself, my twin brother, we were children, like we were only about 10, and there was a couple of challenges, obviously, when we moved into Finglas. We understood then that there was a great need of sort of self-defence, if you want to put it that way. And then we entered into the world of boxing, and for us it was like wonderful. Loved everything about it, and we were only novice boxers, and we are boxing. Like in those days, there would have been a lot of club fights, club tournaments, where we'd be boxing against Transport Boxing Club in Shear Street, We boxed against the North Avenue, over the North Avenue, and boxing against clubs in Ballymun and things like that. And when we were kids, like we were 5 stone, 7, we were put into the ring with national champions, and we were beating national champions, and we were only novices as kids. So from the very outset, nearly, we started attracting newspaper sports writers who were writing about us, the Fitzgerald brothers, the twins, because we were twins. And at one point, the highest honour to win in Dublin at that time was the County Dublin Championships. It's certain tournaments, but the County Dublin Championships, that was the highest one. And at one point, myself and my twin brother, we reached the final. We weighed into the same weight. We reached the final. So it was George Fitzgerald versus G. Fitzgerald. And on that night, it was also Michael Carruth and his brother. Oh. They were against each other. And Mr. Carruth came to us, to Austin, and said to us what he is doing. So we tossed a coin. And I won the County Dublin Championship, I think it was 1979, basically by the toss of a coin. So the winner was G. Fitzgerald in the blue corner, and runners-up was J. Fitzgerald. And that, again, we sort of attracted some press on that as well. And then we were about 1920. We obviously, not the year 1920, the age, switched our attentions to the music world.
Well, that's where I want to go to next. The D11 Runners, an amazing band. We heard a wee bit of them there earlier on with Love Letters. Tell us how that came about.
Well, we were a group of kids, and really, when you look at it now, I'm 55, look back now, and we'd gone to see, ironically enough, we'd gone to see UB40 in the National Boxing Stadium. I was
at that show.
Yeah, we had that. Yeah.
I was at that night, yeah. I remember it well.
That's amazing, Pat. And my brother Joseph, who's passed on, he's a fantastic singer. He had a brilliant voice, very unique. He jumped up onto the stage and grabbed the mic off Ali Campbell, the lead singer of UB40, and he gave out a few tunes, but he was very gently lifted out of it. And we were coming home, and we decided if we could start a band very, very similar to UB40 with a different sound. And that's basically how it started. And we practiced in the school, and none of us really went to lessons. We just learned ourselves. And it was a very, very interesting time. It was a very interesting time in Dublin because there was a lot of music beginning to sprout up, and a lot of bands were starting to make a little bit of a headway. And a lot of live venues. It wasn't the time of the internet or anything like that. And then we progressed to scoring 3 hit singles. I think we had a radio hit in Britain, done the Late Late Show, played the National Concert Hall, played in the largest leg of the park that the country ever staged, which is in the Phoenix Park, and we played probably around between 70,000 people, something like that. And then we actually filled the National Stadium at one point, played a Point Depot and things like that.
You had great success, but early on, I mean, you were an 8-piece with a brass section, including your present wife, or she wasn't then, but she became. But you had a school teacher and his wife went to see one of your early gigs. This story may not be true. You can tell me if it is. And he wrote a book about it. Is that right?
No, I don't remember that.
No?
No. There's loads of stories going around. People have asked me a lot of stories about certain things. So, like one point, I got an interview and a guy says to me, is it true that Christy Digman wrote some of your demo tapes? No, it's not true. That's not true. No, Christy. We knew Christy since we were kids. We played with Aslan and, young men. And we played as, and I still know Christy well, and played him. Now, that wouldn't have been true. The most famous, I suppose, most question I've been asked is, did Roddy Doyle write the book, The Commitments, based on the D11 Runners? Well, I haven't got the answer to that. And the thing is, I'd say he must be tired of being asked that question himself. I don't know. Nobody will answer that. Only he'll answer that himself,
Did one of the band take part in The Commitments?
Yeah, Ken McCluskey.
Yeah, I thought that, yeah. So there is a connection, whether Roddy had his inspiration from yourselves, but you're a different band. You're a very stylish band, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, and my wife, she was a saxophonist, Sandra. Mm-hmm. She was Sandra McGowan at the time, and she was a saxophonist. My brother Joseph was the lead singer. My younger brother Pat, he was the percussionist. It was basically, and my brother's wife, she was the bass. So it was basically, in a sense, a family-oriented band, really.
So it was a family affair, and you had huge success across the water as well. But you got into the writing. Tell us how you went from music to writing books.
Well, I always had an interest or an inkling to do something there in that area, even though I wasn't sort of academically tooled up for it. But however, I was like, in a sense, when I look back on a personal journey, when I look back into the days of when we were boxing as kids and we were coming from Finglas, and we'd known an awful lot of very interesting characters. We'd come from the flats of Ballymun and all that, and then the boxing days, and then the music and everything else. I began to understand very quickly there's great ingredients here for a book, because it seems to when you look at it from a pictorial point of view, in the sense of your own mind, going back into the boxing, we are little kids, skinheads, and we wore caps and all that, and we are like the imagery from an adult's perspective. And I was looking at the imagery, I could see if the imagery was brought into the world of literature, there'd be a great story here. So that's really what kicked her off. And I wrote my first book in 2005, Somebody Up There Likes Me Too.
Yes.
And that was really it, and I thought that was the only thing I was going to do. I came back to it then in 2009, then 2012. Then I came back to it in 2016 with The Secret Life of Ashley Brown, and now where we are present with the book, The Promise Maker.
And your books get great reviews, and they do well. But we'll move on to the current book, and that's The Promise Maker. Frankie the Promise Maker. Tell us about that story.
Yeah, well, that's a sequel to a book called The Secret Life of Ashley Brown. And Frankie's story, Ashley Brown comes into the first 4 or 5 chapters, and what happens there is she's at a funeral of a friend, and Frankie comes along and escorts her. And while they're sitting in the Addison Lodge, which is no longer there, I don't think, they're all conversing, and then they coax Frankie. He's a very old man into telling the story. Now, Frankie's story is unique in this, is that he's born in New York, in the Lower East Side of New York in 1930. And he comes to Dublin as a child with his mother, Nellie. She's a New Yorker. She hooks up with a guy called Paddy. Paddy's a Dubliner from around the inner city of Dublin. Now, he's a hardcore, brutal drinker, fighter, brawler type of guy. And she comes to Dublin with him. The book doesn't tell us why she does, but that'll come out in probably another book down the line, why she does. But they come to Dublin. And then what they come into, we had the worst slums in Europe. So they're moving in from the Lower East Side of New York, which would have been around, say, the 5 Points, where all the Irish would have lived. And they're coming from basically the Lower East Side of New York into Dublin, which has the worst slums in Europe. And in New York, for example, at that particular time, you had 3 people groups. You had the Italians, the Irish, and the Jews, the main type of people groups. But in Dublin at the same time, you had the Italians, the Irish, and the Jews. And you had all this sort of crime-ridden area where you had the Animal Gang. They would have been just emerging out of like 1930, the Civil War, what went on in Dublin being flattened, impoverished, and then you had the Animal Gang. You had other gangs. You had the Hoya Gang. You had the Ash Street Gang. You had certain particular gangs. The Animal Gang was the most famous. They called them all animal gangs, but the Animal Gang actually originated from Corporation Street. And that would have been where the cage was. Now, the cage was a prison-like building where tenement people were put into. And that would have been just right on the very front of the Monto. The Monto was the biggest brothel in Europe. And you had the biggest brothel in Europe, you had the worst slums in Europe, and you had a crime-ridden thing. Now, the problem with De Valera's idea of the Colleen dancing at the crossroads, he didn't want any crime or anything like that basically broadcasted, or they hushed it all under the carpet because they were trying to paint a picture of a beautiful Dublin now, a beautiful country. We've emerged from these horrific events of 1960, 1922, and in a sense the working class history sort of got lost because it was covered by major events. Now, it's not completely lost, but the fact is that it was basically oral. It was handed down by people. Like we are kids growing up in Dublin and Finglas and things like that. Kids would be going to reform schools and then they'd be saying, well, look at the Miss Letterfrack. When they'd be talking about Letterfrack. So we'd know about Letterfrack, and we would have known his granddad was in the Animal Gang, and they were all from, and the neighbourhood in which we came from, which is Finglas, was built up of people from tenement houses and flat complexes right across the city. So the oral tradition of all our history came down through the generations.
So, George, you're saying that your research for this story was predominantly the oral history that was passed on in Finglas and Dublin?
No, well, I also worked with a man, his name was Georgie Schmitt, and Georgie died when he was 100.
Wow.
and he came into the job up till he was about 96 years of age. Now, he was born in the big house in Townsend Street in 1915. And I said to him, he had a great memory, I said to him, Georgie, what was behind the big house? And he said to me, old broken cottages, Georgie, called the Asylum Yard. Years later, I was looking at a book, and in it was a photograph of these cottages, and he said, where's that? And I had underneath it, Asylum Yard, just off Townsend Street. He didn't get that wrong. So I said to him one day, I used to interview him, and I said to him, Georgie, what was Dublin like in 1930? Now remember, he'd have been 15. Mm-hmm. He wasn't 12 or 2. He was 15. Mm-hmm. And he said to me, squalor. Complete and utter squalor. Mm-hmm. He said people died on the streets with no food, and nobody wore a pair of shoes. Nobody wore shoes. No kids wore shoes. It was basically horrifically impoverished. He said you couldn't even comprehend it in this world that you live in today. So I understood there's a fantastic story here. Mm-hmm. And all I have to do is put it all together. And that's what I did with the story of Frankie.
So the Promised Land, or the Promised Maker, I should say, and it definitely wasn't the Promised Land. The Promised Maker, Frankie. The story is set back in the 30s, and it comes right. How far up does it go? When does the story sort of finish?
The first book, which in Frankie's story, that ends when he's about 17 years of age. Mm-hmm. The next one will be Little Miss Mads, or that'll continue. There'll be 3 books probably in his life, which will bring him up to modern day.
I was thinking that it sounded like a story that has another one in it, and there's 2 more, you tell us. Yeah, well, you see, the Irish Times even said it's filled with colourful characters. You have the likes of Buster, you have Slasher, you have Harry Boy, you have Codswallop, you have Mary Applejaws, right? And you have a priest in there called Snobsbody. He's the type of guy that knocks you out. Where did you get the names, George?
The names just come to me, it just come to me, and it's been described in a few reviews as Dickensian. Now, you have a particular character in there called Daisy May, and Daisy May is a beautiful, cunning, basically Dublin-type version of Fagin, except she's much more vicious. Uh-huh. And she's very cunning, and she'd rip you open in a minute. She wouldn't have any problem with dropping you down. See, I read a story one time. I was by a book called Kevin Cairns. He's an American. He'd done a book called Dublin Tenement Life. And I very distinctly remember reading an account where a woman says, we lived on the quays, and she says, we heard the bodies being dropped into the Liffey. And I said to myself, Johnny, yeah. Right? And I could nearly hear her saying, here, we heard the bodies being dropped into the Liffey. Right? So I could actually nearly hear her voice. And I said, nobody really knows what went on in Dublin at that particular time. You know, really, how would you investigate all that? Because who knows what went down the Liffey? So I basically then brought the character Daisy May as a type of woman who would drop you into the Liffey or have someone do it.
Wow.
You know, there was a thing down there in the Monto, it was known as the man trap. And what they used to do was they used to bring 2 women would bring men down to the man trap. But that's what it was. It was a man trap, and they didn't come back out of it. And you had a much more innocent time. You had these guys, they'd be dressed up in suits. They'd work for the madams. The madams ran all the brothels, and they weren't called brothels. They were called kip houses. Right, the kip houses, and they never called the prostitutes. They called them the poor unfortunates. And see, what they used to do was the madams would send blokes over onto the train stations in nice suits, dressed up. And they'd see women getting off, and they'd help them with their baggage. Again, much more innocent time. And he'd ask them, are you staying in Dublin long? And they'd find out that these women were up in Dublin. They'd no real family. And then he'd say, we'll get you a bit of work. We know a lovely woman called Maya Blanc. And he'd bring them to the madams. And before they knew where they were, the country women were walking the streets for the madams. Right? And what they used to do was, they used to grease the window of the kip houses, which was basement tenement houses. They greased the windows, and when the man would be in bed, an English guy would be in with a woman, they'd lift up the windows and put in a fishing rod, and they'd hook out the trousers and rob the wallets. Oh. Right? And you had the Hooers bullies, who are basically looking after the madams, and you had the bread and tea boxers, and you had a whole host of characters that was all around that particular time.
George, it sounds like a fabulous book, a very colourful book with very colourful characters, that's for sure. And you not only describe the characters, but you even have their accents down to a T.